So I think Reid doesn't need any real introduction, and you guys had a chance to read a little bit about it. I'll just give a little personal background. I think I was just thinking, like, when we first met. Do you remember when we first met? At Oxford. Yes. Right. We were doing a debate. Thankfully, we were on the same team. A debate about AI and the future of work.
Yes.
And we won that debate soundly. Yes, absolutely. It's probably online somewhere, and you can see us and a few others debating that topic. Reid's the co-founders, of LinkedIn and a partner at Greylock. Was at PayPal. You guys have read some of his stuff, Blitzscaling, and you just read a bit of Impromptu, Startup of You. And he was a co-founder of Inflection AI. We'll talk about that in a little while, and a board member at OpenAI before moving over to Microsoft.
I was a board member at Microsoft before I also joined the OpenAI board.
Oh, okay. Did you stop being a Microsoft board member for a while?
No.
Oh, you were the whole time. Okay. Oh, when they bought LinkedIn. Yeah, that's right.
After that.
Right. Yeah, I remember I was with you when that happened too.
Yes, exactly.
We were at the Vatican, and
this is around the world.
and Reid kept disappearing and doing these phone calls. And I was like, Reid, that's kind of rude. We're all like here, and then I found out that LinkedIn got sold, and I was like, okay, that's a pretty good excuse. So let me just start off with a question, I think, about Gen AI. So there's a bunch of folks here, and Gen Z, millennials, or whatever generations you are. And in your Bologna commencement speech, you talked about this concept of Gen AI and how it's different. Tell us a little bit about that.
So, macro thesis, which you've seen in a number of things, is that actually one of the things that is too often not described of what's going on with artificial intelligence is human amplification. So you can describe it as human amplification intelligence. And
is this microphone on?
Oh, should be. Yes.
Yeah,
maybe
okay.
I need to.
All right. Okay.
Just move it a little closer. That'll help. And speak up a bit. So, what the thesis is that if we're in a cognitive industrial revolution and the steam engine of the mind, is it just an inevitable quick thing to it's cognitively better at us than everything, or is there a extended period, maybe a very, very long period, at which it's amplifying? And I think that's underdescribed as a high probability. And so the various work is various ways of kind of trying to show that. And it's anything from showing how I would co-write a book with AI. I don't think I would do it again that way, or anyone else should, which is like, prompt answer, framing, but as ways of kind of showing what it is as a research assistant. So what that leads to is when you begin to think about the generations of human generations, our millennial and Gen X and all the rest, to some degree, those are correlating now more with technological revolutions and trends. Familiarity with the internet, familiarity with social media, familiarity with mobile phones. And that's what I've actually taken this human amplification thesis and also have that as a posit, that one of the things that where I see optimism is that if you think, hey, there's actually going to be generation AI where people are natively using AI agents, et cetera, for how they navigate their world and life, that actually is going to be a human amplification set of moments, and that's one of the things that we should be looking at. And that's part of the reason why I did that, and was kind of calling it generation AI to try to get people to pay attention and
kind of have a buzzword.
Yes, exactly.
But is it a whole generation? So I mean, as AI is advancing very rapidly, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier, and people move down those scaling laws. We'll talk more about that in a little while, I guess. How long is that period where humans and machines are working together, and that there's a partner? Is that something we should be thinking of as in decades, years, centuries?
So my belief but I think that intelligent people argue everything from years to centuries, right? My belief is that it's more on the decades to centuries side, in part because one of the things that if you track what the trajectory lines of the cognitive capabilities of these devices are, and by the way, I started my studies in artificial intelligence when I was an undergraduate here. This building didn't exist when I was here as an undergraduate, but Terman did, and I was in Terman studying AI stuff. What I actually see is happening is there's enormously increasing set of cognitive capabilities of doing certain kinds of cognitive tasks, but I don't necessarily see it doing one of the things that where you say, well, what is kind of fundamental to kind of human intelligence is this kind of amalgam of, like, you have a context awareness that makes you a very good adversarial game player by which you change the rules of the game in what you're doing. So, for example, if anybody here in this room were set to try to, like you said, hey, you're going to die unless you beat AlphaGo, you wouldn't try to outplay it at Go, right? Because you're smart enough to know I'm going to lose, right? If I do that. What you're going to do is, can I unplug it? Can I dump water on it? like what are the other kinds of things? And that's what I mean by kind of adversarial gameplay. Mm-hmm. And that kind of context awareness and such of it, I think I haven't yet seen enter into any of these scale compute AI, kind of models and how they operate. And it's not to say they couldn't, certainly, and it's one of the things there's a whole stack of things I measure for when we get to the next level of scale, like what does recursive self-improvement look like? And, could it figure out how to code the baseline learning algorithm of how these things work better than humans are coding them right now? Mm-hmm. Like, I look at those kind of things to say, are you having some path to having some kind of, kind of massive intelligence capability? And the answer is, it's super intelligence already today. GPT-4 is more capable at a bunch of stuff than any one of us in this room, right? But that's not alarming. And so it's like, okay, I tend to think that we will be actually in the decades, maybe even much longer, as collaborators by current heuristic guess. Mm-hmm. But I update that guess every time I look at a new system.
Yeah, no, we're all updating in sort of real time here. Yeah. But it is a really interesting question that GPT-4, lots of tools are already a lot more intelligent than us on some dimensions. And there's different ways of being smarter than us. I mean, obviously, whatever, a chess computer or a calculator can beat us, but even just you could have a human or an AI that's just faster than us, even if it does the same kind of reasoning, or it can have the sum of different kinds of knowledge. But this sort of tale of adversarial, unusual approaches is something that we seem to have a real advantage in.
Yeah, and also part of it is we're adaptive, and we go, okay, how do we adapt to this new circumstance and with this new...
outside the box.
Yes, right, this new tool, right? So it's like, for example, I've sat with CEOs who've said, oh, maybe I should just fire my marketing department and put GPT-4 in as my marketing department. And you're like, well, think about the universe where everybody did that. Marketing is competitive. It's how do you market versus another. You're very quickly going to hire back a marketing department. Maybe it'll be a marketing department that knows how to use GPT-4. GPT-5 is playing a different kind of marketing game using this tool in order to do it.
Yeah.
But that's part of the reason why, it's not, like, that's how we're iterating. And as I was pointing out, I won't name these CEOs, like, look, currently, I have absolute confidence that our planning capabilities for saying, hey, this is going to be a 15-step plan. Here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3. Oh, wait a minute. Step 3 is a little off my plan. I'm now going to replan. I'm going to replan to step, kind of 3B and 4 prime and so forth as ways of doing this. Currently, these systems aren't very good at doing that. They get trapped in all kinds of lacuna and so forth. That's getting better. That's not to say it's fixed to where it currently is. But that's, again, another part of that kind of context awareness of, are we on track? Do we need to pivot and iterate in this competitive game? And I think that's one of the things that I have rational optimism that we will be adding into the cognitive mix for quite some time.
Yeah, it makes me think about, so when we did that call center study, there was some questions that came up very frequently. How do you change your password? There's this Pareto curve with this long tail of obscure questions that only came up once in the data set. And the humans are really good at those weird questions. So that was a natural division of labor. And I was thinking, okay, the AI is kind of marching its way down. But I think what you're making me think is that that's not a static set. That what's going to happen is as the system marches down, humans will be thinking of all these other ways around it. So that tail is just going to keep growing for quite a while. Like maybe at some point, the AI will get better at doing those one-off, weird, out of the box cases. But for a long time, that humans seem to have a comparative advantage in figuring out how to go down that far end. Is that kind of what?
Yes, exactly. Like for example, one of the things is, like obviously, I'm a massive believer in the value of creating autonomous vehicles. I think it's good for humanity in all kinds of different ways. But like for example, one thing that we haven't fitness tested these autonomous vehicles yet on is what happens when you have human beings trying to defeat the autonomous vehicles.
Yeah.
And the answer is, we can do it pretty easily.
Yeah, they start bullying. They found that a little bit. You come to an intersection, and you know that the autonomous vehicle is going to give way. It's been programmed that way, and you can start. Yeah, people have started doing that. Yeah,
and human beings are very good at doing that.
Yeah,
it doesn't require like an elite degree.
So it's related to another concept of yours, cognitive GPS. How is this similar or different? That generation AI. So you're using this tool. But with a cognitive GPS, you're kind of like relying on it for a lot of the decision making.
So part of the reason I use the GPS as a metaphor for this, and this is part of, it's going to be a chapter in a book that I'll be publishing, I think, early next year. And part of it is to both show all of the good things, but also show some of the challenges and course of it. Mm-hmm. So you say, well, look at what GPS has added to our lives. It means that we now can go to unusual new places very easily. We can go, okay, where is a good place to have lunch nearby? We can, find out that our friends are actually, here and in town and say, hey, let's grab coffee. There's all kinds of things that lead to the kind of navigation of the world. And if you say there's a steam engine of the mind and it's kind of navigation of a variety of cognitive tasks and mental tasks, you have all of that kind of navigational enablement. On the other hand, GPS is not without its questions. Like, for example, we all voluntarily carry around our low jack trackers, right? Mm-hmm. And the kinds of things that come about because of those low jack trackers can be unpleasant in unsurprising ways. And not just in circumstances of war when, Russian generals carrying one around, right? But there's a number of things that can happen there and, raises questions about privacy, raises questions around.
What about the cognitive thing? So one of the things I find when I use the GPS is my brain just, sometimes I used to disagree with it. Now I don't bother. If it says to go this way, I almost always just follow the instructions.
Yes.
Fine for driving. It's not like the most important decision. But if you have this as a GPS for all your other decisions, how do I reply to my wife? Which which job offer should I take? If you start delegating more and more of the decisions, what does that do to our?
That's precisely the thing about why you have to navigate and say, well, look, some of these previous areas of intelligence that were highly valued become less valued. Mm-hmm. That's already happened in history. Mm-hmm. So, for example, centuries ago, memory used to be the most important higher order bit, right? And now memory is important because you have to have enough working memory to figure out how do I go find this information? Mm-hmm. But if you go, well, I don't really remember that, it's like, but I can find it, doesn't matter as much. Mm-hmm. So there's changing nature. Then there's this question around, don't allow yourself to get intellectually sloppy. And so, for example, we already see that on a bunch of stuff on the internet. I found this on the internet. It must be true. You're like, well, hate to break it to you. And so similarly, the question will be as it produces more and more, kind of valuable, reliable navigational advice, you'll tend to say, well, that's just the thing I should do. And that will be a challenge. This over-reliance will be a challenge that we'll have to navigate.
I mean, can you imagine, is this a net bad thing, a net good thing, if people start delegating a lot of their decisions to an AI for them? Does that free them up to spend the remaining brain power on more important things, or they become sort of like robots?
Well, I think the important thing, and this is part of why the dialogue is important, the important thing is, what's the way that we should be training these agents so that they're helping human beings get to their better lives, their better selves? And some of that is, by the way, no, don't read that crazy theory on the internet about how hydrochloroquine is good for your COVID.
Well, see, okay, but how are you're having the AI tell them that? So
possibly, yes. Look, this is the governance of these systems.
Is that kind of circular? I mean, you're telling them to listen to a machine to tell them what to read? That's even scarier.
Well, we do that already.
Well,
just because, look, there's this search engines, right, that produce, like I'm searching for a query and I'm looking for something.
Look, I'm imagining, oversimplified, two people.
Yes.
One where we are very trusting in our technological sources and do what they tell us to do.
Yeah.
And the other is where we don't have those crutches. Maybe we make worse decisions, but we're deciding ourselves. And I'm saying, is it obvious that the one where the AI system is giving us these better answers? You're imagining that the AI answer system is telling us not to. Was it hydrochloric?
Hydrochloric, yeah, whatever the thing that Trump was pumping as a COVID
will the
solution.
Somebody who likes Trump be using an AI system that tells them to do that?
Well, but actually, I think this is part of what we get to is what is the formulation? What is the range of these AI agents? Where should be the range of kind of choice by individuals doing it?
Yeah.
What should be the?
But in either world,
well, but like for example,
now you're putting more power in Inflection AI to tell me what to do.
Well, I think that the short answer is that we always presume on some things outside ourselves. The Robinson Crusoe, this may be news to you, is a myth, right? We live in a social environment.
We totally do.
Which we are.
And maybe people have always been following somebody's instructions.
We are. Yeah. That's the short answer.
And is that not changing over time?
Well, it changes, but we should try to change it for the better. So, for example, if you say, look, the artifact that I have now, like, for example, one of the major artifacts that we used for centuries was books, right? And which book should you trust? Right. And which one should you read on this? And which book should you say, oh, that book, that's now wrong.
Okay.
Right? Ether theory of physics, that's now wrong. Right. Don't read the ether theory of physics book. Right?
So I'll buy that.
Relativity.
So let me take a different dystopian aspect to it. If these AI systems, because of scaling laws, become more and more centralized, we were talking earlier, and that it could be a relatively small number of them. Is that so? Now there's a relatively small number of everyone following a certain set of instructions. Is that worse than having a disorganized set of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of books and articles?
Well, I think what you want is the right blend of trust sometimes and innovate and differentiate in other times.
Yes.
Right. And that was the reason I was going to a medical example, because if you kind of said, hey, my theory is like take one of the classic, I think, idiots things of our time, which is the anti-vax people, right? Which is, I know someone who had a bad side effect and vaccines can be bad for you. And you're like, look, do the statistic math. Of course, there are some people but all of us as a group are much better off with the lottery when we all take the vaccine. Right. And the negative outcomes for most children, most adults are much, much better when we're all doing it.
But is this like Singapore has a centralized system of government that works great when they've got a benevolent dictator. But if a different person became in power, it would be really, really bad. Couldn't the same thing happen if we had this oracle that, under your vision, is telling us the correct medical knowledge, but if somehow that oracle went bad, then we'd all get the wrong knowledge? Is that riskier?
Well, I think it's one of the reasons why you always have a kind of a plural diversity, and part of the cross-checking it like you do with medical knowledge is you have multiple sources cross-checking it. You have multiple.
So there's not a single oracle.
Yeah, and also, look, I actually think part of this agentic universe we're going to isn't going to be like the one ring of the one model. I think it'll be multiple models composed together in cross-checking. Like, for example, part of how you get safety and alignment is say, oh, you're asking for something that may be self-harm. So there will be a model that will specialize in trying to figure out, are you trying to figure out how to have the agent aid you in your self-harm? And it's going to say, whoa, no, don't answer that question that way, because, we have a tremendous number of people die through suicides. Let's not try to, let's try to diminish that number. Let's try to alleviate the kind of mental suffering rather than, kind of create the suicide enablement bomb.
But who's making that decision about that? It sounds like the way you're describing it, there's like a team at OpenAI or Inflection that says, we don't want that to happen.
Well, there's definitely teams that are doing that. There's definitely the teams are talking to each other and publishing papers and doing all that. There's definitely discussions with both the government on, what are the kinds of things that create alignment and safety, and there's discussions with the press when the press is being critical about why it is you're trying to be a good steward for these things.
Okay.
And that has to be a range of things. And so networks of accountability really need to be there. And part of those, and there's networks for all of them. Like, one of the things that the press dialogue tends to be misformed on is they go, well, companies only really care about their profit. It's like, well, no, companies care about their equity value over time, which can be really crushed if they do something really bad. And like, if you get called in front of Congress or the other kind of things, those can be bad and things. And so they're trying to create their equity value over time, which is broadly, there are networks of responsibility. It doesn't mean trust them on everything, right? There have been cigarette companies.
One more question on this plurality versus, and then I promise we'll move on. Kai-Fu Lee was saying that he thought that every country should have separate LLMs. There shouldn't be just a few Bay Area companies that decide what the truth is. Do you think it would be a good idea if we had hundreds of different LLMs, each with their own local morals and understandings of medicine?
Well, I think a diversity of LLMs is good. And even when you get the medicine, like, you could say, well, wait a minute, this acupuncture LLM is actually surprisingly good when you look at the medical data. And we should compare and contrast its results with Western medicine. And when Western medicine has done analysis of acupuncture, they don't really understand what the cause of it. But they say, look, there's actually in these deeply control studied groups, it has some positive effects. And so so you'd want to have that kind of diversity both for the now and ongoing, because knowledge, learning, and truth is a dynamic process. We it's like science. We get better and better at it, and we want to make sure we have the openness to the diversity of that. And I think there's also value in the diversity of, kind of broadly different ethical systems. Now, I want the ethical systems that view, kind of non-violence as a human societal goal, both within society and between societies. I want those to have more force, because I think that's a better world to be living in. And I think the ethical systems which embody that are better ethical systems. I think the ethical systems that allow as much individual autonomy as you can without creating, violence to other human beings, I think is also a good thing.
But specifically that question, would the world be better if France, Brazil, Saudi Arabia, China each had their own system and didn't use OpenAI's and Gemini and Inflection? Or do you think that they should, that the world is better if we kind of pool our resources into a few?
Well, there's definitely some value in pooling, but I actually think that the notion of it's one of the reasons, but the parallel is, I try to help stand up entrepreneurial ecosystem in every kind of Western-style democracy. So I will meet with any government leader on, can we create a Silicon Valley in Singapore, France, Germany, UK, et cetera. Brazil, sure. I haven't had that meeting yet, but I would do that meeting. But I also view the Western-style democracies. I want that to be the style where the world governance is heading towards. And that doesn't mean that we have it exactly right here, or the French have it exactly right, or but it's like I want to be on that journey and path. So, for example, all the ones you mentioned seem to be fine. If you said today, would I want to have a Russian LLM? The answer is no.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, fair enough. I'm going to go to the students. I got one more question. So, a few weeks ago, I read that Mustafa Suleyman was leaving Inflection and going to Microsoft, and I was like pretty stunned actually, because I knew you had put a lot of money in. I was like, he's screwing Reid. This is not good. So I sent you a quick text, and you responded right back and said it was like a smiley face. Yes. It wasn't a smiley face. It was. What was it? It was
the
like
usual one I do is
emoji.
it's the glasses emoji. Smiling face.
But anyway,
that's my normal. That's the normal response.
I got the sense you were not upset.
Yeah.
Tell us like what really happened.
That question, I'm not sure I'm answering exactly.
I tried.
Yes. Look, so the part of what we were doing with Inflection was to say, it's a public benefit corp, and part of the thing is the mission is how do we, because like, for example, to your very earliest question, what's the notion of designing agents that would be help, maybe everybody, but a lot of people be their better versions of themselves. And so, for example, on the Inflection and Pi side, it's like, if you go to Pi and say, you're my best friend, Pi won't go, oh, I'm your best friend, you should spend all your time with me. Because we go, well, that's not
unhealthy.
That's unhealthy.
Yeah.
It's just like, no, I'm here as your companion, but I'm here to help you with the other friends. Let's talk about some of your other friends. Have you talked to your other friends recently? Oh, they're out of town. It's like, okay, well, when are you going to see them? Like what?
How many of you guys have used Pi? You guys might be. It's
I recommend it. Whatever.
Yeah, it's fun. It is very friendly.
Yes.
This is my best friend.
No, but we like part of our training of it is to not try to absorb your attention to Pi, but to help you be your better self navigating the world.
Okay.
Right. So that's that, and that's, for example, when you say, well, what kinds of AI agents should we have? We should have AI agents like Pi and other ones. Like when you're navigating these the various kind of
but
cognitive GPS.
Isn't it bad for Inflection when Mustafa leaves?
Well, so look,
and not just him, the chief science officer.
So the theory for us was, this is our mission. Would it be best to create an agent with Inflection? And what we realized when we looked at where the nature of doing these agents was and what the economic business models of them would be over time, that the business at Inflection should pivot. And we pivoted it towards a developer API for more kind of B2B, kind of economics. But then we said, well, but we care about public benefit corp. We care about this mission intensely. Maybe there's a way to have that mission keep going. And the thought was,
you didn't have enough scale.
We didn't think that the startup path for that would work. Even
with all the money, billion, whatever,
Well, we thought it would take billions.
Yeah.
Right. And then capital markets, revenue streams, et cetera. Whereas the business opportunity for Inflection was how do you create, because we have a unique API with this stuff, because we're the only of these models that actually explicitly trains EQ equally with IQ.
Right. No.
Right. So it's a unique model.
Is EQ easier than IQ?
It's the same. It's different,
okay.
But same kind of human feedback, reinforcement, and so forth. But you have to do the same kind of
definitely has a higher EQ. Yeah.
Yes,
definitely.
And so the goal with Inflection was high IQ, high EQ, and we said, okay, we'll provide that on a B2B model because that's where the actual business of this is going. And then Mustafa and Karen were like, well, but we want to keep doing the agent. Maybe we can work out this deal with Microsoft where both wins.
And to be clear about the billions, is that because of scaling laws, or is it broader economics than that? Is it like the classic working down the compute data parameters all have to grow, or is it something, or other aspects of scale?
It's fundamentally, well, this is part of this is why the AI revolution is a scale compute revolution and is fundamentally commercial. Is it scale compute, scale data, scale teams, taking risks doing it. And companies are the only things that, outside of wartime can do that.
But I mean, like when I say scaling, I mean like very specifically, like the Dario Amodi, chinchilla type. Is that the one that you're specifically, or is it sounds like it's broader than that?
Well, I think it'll be scale across all of these vectors, which includes scale compute. But I was saying it's more than that.
Okay.
That and.
All right. So I want to get, so these guys write these great assignments here. We're a really smart group here. So I want to call out a few of them. There's so many good ones, but is here?
He just went to the bathroom.
Oh, okay. You knew I was
You
gonna
come back
call
to
out.
him, yes.
Okay. How about, do you want, so you want to tell us about so Reid loves to think about futures where things can go right. He's a Star Trek fan. Tell us about your...
when we launched Stanford Human-Centered AI Institute, the post that I did was, what could possibly go right?
I remember that. Yes, exactly. So not what could go wrong,
Yes.
what could go right. So tell us what could go right. Sorry, I didn't tell you I was going to call
Should
on
we
you.
pass her a mic?
Yeah. About gaming and, I don't know. If you want, you don't have to.
On your assignment.
Eric, I didn't know you were a brutal cold caller.
Yeah.
Of course I'm a cold caller. I learned that early in teaching.
Yes.
So I worked at a gaming company 2 summers ago, and I'm a co-chairman AI. And the assignment was just thinking about ways that a certain industry could benefit from AI. So I first talked about how I think a common application in the beginning of generative AI was with NPCs, language models have it more interactive and immersive. But I also think that we can also have it I mostly focus on a systems aspect. So how do we use generative AI and coding in system development as we look from less of macro computer science, individual devs, to also seeing how these generative AI systems with more context windows can understand huge systems. I think generative AI is really good at small tasks now, but will be better when, ICs maybe don't get a full macro view of what's going on in the whole system. And so can we have these these profilers? Can we have, helped teams? And I think that was especially for small gaming companies. I worked at a very large one, and I think that it benefited a lot from scale. But I think, and as we have, foundation models and that monopoly, it could also go the other way too, of helping smaller companies be able to compete with these larger studios and just have more IP all around.
And LLM agents, would that be part of this future scenario?
Yeah, I think the agentic universe, everyone's really excited about. I think agents are really great in deploying. I also think, though, that we should look at ways that generative AI can couple with human intelligence. And generative AI and LLMs, for example, are really good at iterating over state spaces. And so things like cybersecurity, things where the cost of being right once outweighs the cost of being wrong many times. I think there's a lot of emphasis on lack of hallucination, but I think if we can apply, generative AI to specific areas where, humans don't have to be paranoid all the time, and being right once with an LLM and have that co-creation, can outweigh even if it's, wrong, a lot.
Great. Let's get a couple other quick scenarios, and then we'll just open up to questions. So maybe right. We called on you when you stepped out. You got to be careful.
Sorry.
Just tell us a little bit about gold.
Sorry, I took a bit of a creative approach to this. I wrote a short story. I'm not going to read the whole short story, but I'll read the first two
You wrote it, or
paragraphs.
you had Gemini write it?
Yeah. Sorry?
You wrote it, or you had Gemini write it?
No, I wrote it actually. But then I'll just summarize really quickly what I imagine. In the year 2034, humanity stood on the brink of an educational renaissance, an era where the boundaries of knowledge were no longer defined by geographic or socioeconomic constraints. It was a transformation ignited by the widespread adoption of advanced AI systems, particularly a marvel known as Sora, which embodied the dreams of a truly globalized intellect. In a modest village in Nigeria, young Ada engaged in a deep discussion about theoretical physics with her AI tutor, Sora. This AI, an ethereal presence manifested through holographic technology, adapted its appearance to mirror Ada's cultural surroundings, turning abstract concepts into familiar dialogues. With each lesson tailored to her pace and interest, Ada delved into realms of knowledge that once seemed beyond her reach. I won't read the whole thing, but essentially what I was trying to get to was that you can imagine a future where you have this holographic presence and you have less of a sort of Western-centric production of knowledge. I wrote, for example, that in 2034, the Nobel Prizes are actually represented by Indonesia and countries that have large populations, but they're benefiting from these AI tutors. And then sort of the more negative aspects where that, you see typical bastions of privilege in like large universities in the West, in New York and London and so on, generally being reserved to certain socioeconomic statuses, using now social capital as a way to prevent, countries or socioeconomic statuses are gaining access to education to create that marker of difference. And we see like civil unrest and sort of different things around this. And then some countries also sort of facing cultural dilution. So Cambodia and Azerbaijan were examples that I used, but just because of the lack of data that you would have to train these AI tutors that could be there.
Cool. I love the story format. You want to tell us a little bit about Dr. MD?
Okay, so I kind of looked at the impact of AI on healthcare, and what I thought. I mean, I won't like read the whole thing, but essentially, I'll point out some few things. The first thing that I wanted to point out was that with AI, healthcare will be like obviously improve a lot in many different aspects. But some of the things that we should be more careful is that AI can only get better with a lot more data. But a lot of these data for patients are super sensitive in terms of privacy. So I think some of the measures in terms of like how can we safely or more privately introduce data into these AI systems is going to be a major concern for these AI systems. And another thing is that I think you mentioned, Reid, that in one of your readings, that AI will not necessarily replace your jobs, but serve as a co-pilot. And I think this is also true in healthcare as well. AI won't necessarily replace doctors or clinicians or people who are serving in like hospitals, but rather they'll act as agents that can help make decisions or aid in terms of diagnostics and monitoring of these diseases, but not necessarily make a definitive decision on like, we can do this instead of doctors, but we'll be like, instead we'll do this along with doctors so that they can better diagnose this or any of these things on healthcare beyond diagnosis. But yeah.
Great. Well, thanks. Let's just open up to questions. I think I saw some hands going up. So who would like to ask a first question? Yeah, go ahead. Just remember to say your name and go ahead and tell us your question. Great.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead. Give her the mic if you can. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm from the GSP, and I'm very interested in AI and productivity. One of the questions, maybe it's pretty futuristic, is that as we develop more agents and more personalized experience, do you see a future where actually personal data and nowadays belong to enterprise shifts and change authority and belong to the employee? So for example, today when I leave a company and I move to a different company, I can take my team with me. Could I do it actually with AI that already knows me?
Great question. And one of the things that happens when you begin to think about what is an agentic future, like if we all have a personal agent, if we all have agents that we work with at the office, et cetera, I think the answer is going to be blurry. Like, for example, today, like you can bring your address book with you because, these people and so forth, and it's kind of ridiculous for a company to say you can't bring your own address book with you. But for example, you can't bring the list of company contacts for selling things, with you or buying things from you. And so, and I think that part of the thing that's going to happen with these agents is that, and so I think part of the way it's going to get navigated is you will bring an agent that's kind of with you on some of the stuff you're doing in work that's like having your own iPhone, but that agent will have some limited access to what's going on within the work environment because the work environment will want to have IP that doesn't bleed out. What does that limited access look like is an interesting, kind of TBD. And then most of the stuff will actually be done within the work context because it isn't just IP and data that companies try to have as their unique position. There's also things that are going to name trade secrets or plans or other kinds of things that will continue and maybe even be more important in future universe that they don't leak out. So there's going to be this weird, like, well, I got my agent. What can my agent know about what I'm doing in the work environment, right? And that'll be a TBD question. So.
Thank you.
Do you see people as mostly having like their own agents that work on their behalf? And what's the economic model of that? Because it seems like every time someone tries to make a software that like is personal, it ends up that the recommender engine works for Amazon or somebody else.
Well, that was part of the theory on Pi, and part of the business model is ultimately getting paid by the individual themselves, so that the economic relationship aligns to the individual relationship. Because while the advertising business model of various sorts is a super strong model, it does have some misalignments of interest that can be kind of a, in some
But it's hard to
cases-
get people to pay.
Yes, well, that's the thing, is like, what will they actually pay for? So I think there will be agents that'll be entirely on, and this again gets back to what I was just saying before, is I think part of what you're gonna have to do is have a certain amount of transparency and accountability about what the agent is. So, for example, if you're offering an agent that says, look, we make money by convincing you to buy things, then that's going to have to be transparent in some way to the individual, to the users. And if companies don't do that, governments are going to have to say, you're going to have to be transparent about that, right?
But it sounds like you think that model can work, that
Yes.
where we have, like each of us has our own
Yes.
agent that works for us
Yes.
and is maximizing what we want rather
Yes.
than somebody else.
Yes.
Okay, great. Let's, wow, so many hands. How about on this side? Let's do both of you in order. He's gesturing to you first, so go ahead.
And a mic is coming your direction.
Yeah, and here comes the mic, and just say your name. Now
Thank you. I'm studying CS undergrad. When we try to imagine a world that has the outcomes or positive outcomes that we want to see, but also want to, maybe create a practical business application, but goes towards that goal. How do we balance like our imagination and like our preferred world with what we can actually plan right now that's practical and drives the business?
So I myself try to embody that question. LinkedIn is an example of that, and as is Inflection. And what you need to do is you need to view, it's kind of this classic, the perfect is the enemy of the good. It's like, what's the good thing that you really want to bake into the fundamental way that the company operates? It's going to cure cancer. It's going to make the climate green and clean. It's going to be equitable across all of the poor country. You can't do everything. It's what's the thing that in your central business loop or technology loop will accomplish that will be naturally aligned with the company's economic goals. Because part of what makes companies go is that they've aligned a whole set of different economic forces, the investing forces, the employing forces, the capital allocation, the resources that are being used against markets that are providing resources in order to do that. And that's the engine in which these technologies and businesses are created. So you want to say, what are the things that I'm fundamentally doing here? And I'll give you an example on the LinkedIn side, just as one, but this was one I happen to be close to. So it baked into the LinkedIn kind of mission, culture, it's on the values, on the onboarding, on the way we describe it, is the top customer for LinkedIn is the free member, not the paid member, not the enterprises. So when you're evaluating any product feature, anyone in the company can say, that's not good for the free member, right? And if it's not good for the free member, it doesn't happen. Right. And so it's like, yes, we have these economic loops of, hey, we do great for recruiters and job seekers and entrepreneurs and salespeople and everything else. But the free member is always, and that's how we kind of elevate the whole ecosystem. And that's kind of looking at as what the design feature is and having something that's specific versus a kind of a set of general principles.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm a undergrad in CS and master's in MS&E. I really appreciated your article about how technology makes us more human, particularly the sentence, "The story of humanity is the story of technology." Some historians may add that the story of humanity is also the story of war and conflict. And we're noticing a lot of the rhetoric today surrounding AI parallels that around nuclear proliferation, arms race, making sure this technology is in the hands of Western-led democracies. Do you see AI becoming treated similar to nuclear proliferation, or do you see it becoming more of an open resource like the internet, for example? And how can we ensure that this happens?
So unlike nuclear proliferation, which was like, yes, there was nuclear power plants and so forth, but unlike nuclear proliferation, which was primarily weapons, so a national state control and driver was the key thing, AI is primarily being driven by the commercial realm. And so as the commercial realm, it's much harder to have like anti-proliferation treaties and a bunch of other things. And yet, there are some issues there. Like, so for example, we're already a little creaky on the whole like cybersecurity thing. We have hospitals, being held ransom by hackers, other kinds of things. And AI will exacerbate that particular kind of problem, especially if it's open and in the hands of everybody. And there's, like I was earlier saying, I'm very happy to have, Brazil have AI, and I'm not happy to have Russia have AI in today's world. And so you have to kind of think about, it's really kind of a blend of the two areas. And part of the thing that I think we're going to have, and like it really has amplified the whole, like we're literally living in an environment of war around cybersecurity that we're kind of ignoring, right? Like that war is actually in fact happening today as we're speaking. And we need to kind of address that and try to get back to non-war circumstances. So I'm bullish on its evolution for many societies and providing, and like, for example, to your earlier centralization question, the fact that we have at least 3 companies, yes, they're all, on the West Coast of the US, but at least 3 companies that'll be offering APIs to developers around the world. There'll be a lot of general enablement and not captured by one company. Mm-hmm. And I think it's 3 companies going to more. Mm-hmm. So I think that's good. And at least 3. And so I think that I'm generally speaking positive on all of that. But the open part of it, you have to be careful about, because I myself have been a massive advocate for open source. I was on the board of Mozilla for 11 years. We open sourced a number of projects at LinkedIn. Open models are not the same thing as open source. So when you have the open model and it's in the hands of rogue states, it's in the hands of criminals, it's in the hands of terrorists, could something bad that's on the order of like a natural disaster like a hurricane or worse happen, you want to try to make sure those don't. And like, for example, cybersecurity getting like massively slammed, and all of a sudden it's like hospitals are being taken down by criminal and terrorist groups.
Explain a little bit more concretely, like what is the thing that you're worried about there?
Well,
how does the LLM or ever like?
Well, already an LLM today can do a simple version, which is the phishing version, mm-hmm. which is I would like to figure out how to get Eric Brynjolfsson's password. Mm-hmm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the creativity of an LLM on that target. Now, normally you do 1 million people, because targeting one person, after you get the 7th email trying to get your password, you get, you get a little suspicious. But like various techniques to try to do that. And
so you can do it at scale very creatively, yes. Impersonate.
Yeah. So like you try to do everybody in the hospital, mm-hmm. right? To try to get, yes, to try to get admin credentials.
And the LM can do that better than just sort of a traditional brute force. Yeah.
Because it can A/B test and follow up, respond to think, well, is there really a person on the other side of this email? Absolutely. I really am like you're the IT administrator.
Today I was talking to the Tesla folks and I did a little chat with them, and I was like 99% sure this was a bot. And then they called me and they're talking. I say, "Oh, wait, you're a person?" And I think they were using such canned kind of like, maybe it was like bot enabled, but I literally said to her, "Oh, I didn't realize you were a human being."
Yes.
Or maybe it was just a really. I actually said, or maybe you're just a really, really good bot.
Yes, exactly. Our audio generation's gotten quite good.
I know. Yeah, it is a Tesla after all, so you never
Yes.
know. But yeah, and of course, a few more ticks, you start getting better at that. So you're like sincerely worried about that, and you think it's a mistake for Llama 3 to be widely available, or is it something that's a future generation you're worried about?
It will be a growing level of worry. Is Llama 3 like a critical mistake, or is it Llama 3.5 or 4? I don't exactly know. I mean, part of the reason why when they first open source Llama and they were looking for people to sign the letter, there's a sentence in that letter saying they will evaluate on a safety basis each model before they release it and choose to release it. And they don't necessarily release everything as open source. That sentence was added in to get my signature.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And conversely, you were on the OpenAI board when they went from not-for-profit to
Well, it's still I was on a non-for-profit board. There's still a non-for-profit board. They have a subsidiary that's a for-profit company that's controlled by the nonprofit. People get very confused.
No, that's true. It's a little more complicated. But de facto, it's capped for profit, I guess, even like, right?
Well, the economics are capped for profit to make that work within a nonprofit arena. But the economics of the subsidiary for profit.
And maybe say a few words about, was it basically because that's the only way to fund it? Or is it
Well, yeah. I mean, look, part of the thing is you have scale. If scale compute is the only thing that can do this, how do you get the billions of dollars? And the brilliant idea that the OpenAI folks had is say, well, there's a bunch of commercially valuable things that we could essentially work in partnership with companies while we're trying to do the beneficial AI for humanity. And that's how we can get the economics to scale our 501c3 mission.
Okay, great. Let's get some questions over on this side. I'll start in the front and we'll go back. Go ahead.
Irene, part of the GSB. Many companies are sitting on troves of just customer private data, and they're unwilling to hand that over to general sort of foundation model providers. How do you think companies should think about utilizing that data to build solutions to service those customers, taking in consideration around sort of fair use and governance?
This is a problem that will be rapidly solved. And there's a lot of different shots on goal for solving it. I think one of the most general ones is there will be a set of robust techniques by which you take any, like even moderate sized to larger pool of data, and you can make synthetic data that looks like it, that doesn't have the individual customer data. And what's more, like part of what they get to is like, well, it requires trading on the whole internet. It's like, well, actually, in fact, as you get good at creating synthetic data, you might be able to create, like, here's a pile of free or cheap data, and you create a whole bunch of synthetic data around it. So that's one. There's other things where you say, well, you train the model internally and you have that as only internal. But this is something that lots of companies are going directly at. But those are like 2 of N attempts at this. So.
Related to that, so we were talking about scaling laws bigger and bigger, and obviously some of the companies you're affiliated with are building like gigantic models. There's also a lot of folks who are arguing, well, you know what, actually a very small focused model that has proprietary data is going to be more valuable for lots of economic applications. Do you buy that argument, or do you think it's going to be, that those are just not going to be competitive?
No, actually, I think that there will be a lot of smaller models that will have specific utility. Like one obvious one is if you think everything that has essentially a compute unit is going to be made more intelligently, you're going to frequently want that compute unit to run locally versus calling out to the net.
So just the inference cost?
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So it's not necessarily the training cost, but you just want something that runs really cheaply, and you don't need Einstein level.
And it only needs this.
Yeah.
And blending the models that do this with models that do that, that's something we're already seeing and we're going to see a lot more of.
Okay. Why don't you pass the mic? Let's go a little further back. How about back here?
Hi, thanks. You talked about books, and you wrote a book with GPT-4. I'm wondering if you could talk about copyright. as the main issue that a lot of developers are dealing with now is that they are no longer training on illicitly obtained books, or some of them still are, out of fear for being sued. And there are processes that are going on at the government level in the US to think about whether or not model outputs should be copyrightable, whether or not models themselves should be copyrightable. Companies often claim this implicitly by licensing their models, or whether or not data that is transformed in some way before it's used as pre-training data retains copyright.
So I think, the easiest question in the stack of copyright questions is, could I be able to treat a model as internal, like secret IP that I own and that cannot be taken from me, or it's a crime that's taken from me? And the answer should be yes to that, right? I may choose to open source it or something else, but now on all the rest of it, I tend to think that the notion that it's roughly speaking, the principle that goes to copyright is, like if I buy Eric's book, I'm allowed to read it, I'm allowed to learn from it, I'm allowed to do things with it, I'm allowed to pass it to you, that kind of thing, and that's all part of what copyright. What I'm not allowed to do is, reorder the chapters, put in a few sentences, and sell a version of it, right? And so I think that set of principles is what should be on there. And so, for example, I find the New York Times lawsuit to be a little spurious, because when they get to reproducing the articles, they have to put in the first half of the article to reproduce the whole article, which kind of presumes that you have the article already. So it's not actually, in fact, producing the New York Times article, even though another of their claims is not only is it reproducing accurate New York Times articles, it's reproducing inaccurate New York Times articles. Okay, and so the
but just to be clear, so if it weren't for that they had to do all that, but if a model were spitting out a copy,
yes,
you would agree that would be an infringement.
Yes, okay. Yes, right. And I think it should be no, you shouldn't do that, because it's like, look, we invested in doing that.
Yeah.
Now the question is the thing you invested in, part of the thing that's copyright is we don't say like copyright, like, well, when Eric sells me a copy of his book, I can only I have to forget it after 5 minutes, right? It's like no. It's allowed to be used in a knowledge store. And I think that we are better off in society. Like, copyright is not only about Eric as an author, but about what we should have as a society. I think we're better off as a society having that available for learning and training. So there's the difference between the training and difference from the inference. And part of what I've been telling folks, like, media folks, is say, well, actually, you shouldn't focus on the value of your data set as trying to get a big check for training. You should focus on the value of your data set for being useful in inference, in an operation, because your data tends to be valuable in that framework anyway. And that's where some balance of economics should really flow as an ongoing way, and we should figure out what that is and what it should be. And so I'm sorry.
No, go. Yeah, I thought you were done. Yeah,
I'm copywriting everything I'm saying as I'm saying. I'm not going to lie to you. And so I tend to think that's where we should net out as a society. Now, in the terms of the copyright of the outputs,
and I asked because there's this famous haiku and LinkedIn case about scraping.
Yeah, now part of the reason that we try to be at LinkedIn, by the way, aggressive about scrapers is part of what we try to do is have a compact with our members, especially members first, that you have control over your profile here. If you want to add to it, you want to delete something from it, you can delete something and so on. And so we have a direct relationship with you, and you have control over, like, we allow you to delete the whole thing or rechange the whole thing and so on. And that's a contract. And the problem is, if someone else is scraping that, you lose as an individual that. Right? Yes, it also helps our business model too, but it's partially also that we have a contract with you as an individual that we're trying to be your agent in this regard. And so, and by the way, the fact that we get paid for that is not a bad thing. Like, aligning commercial things with things that are good for you as an individual. So now, and so we don't say, like, for example, we take summaries of profiles and put them out in the public web, right? But we don't put them all in the public web, for that purpose, because it's saying, look, if you're putting it out in the public web, you're saying you get a benefit from everybody possibly reading this and being SEO indexed and all the rest. And I think that part of it is on the reading side, is where I kind of sort out. Now on the output side, I tend to think that the notion of should I be able to publish something and assert copyright? The answer is yes, even if I got a bunch of that stuff from how I was working with a model. It's trivial enough to mod it in a way that it fits the Copyright Office, which is like, I add a period, I change a word, and oh, look, So it's not, but the question we'll have to address is, given the volume of what might be coming out in copyright on these things, and what if I did a prompt and got something, and then Eric used the same system that I did and got a prompt that looked like that, and I said, well, wait, I already copyrighted the output. You're probably like, well, that doesn't actually, in fact, help what we're doing as a society. And really, should I have the copyright issue just because I happen to put in a prompt, a week earlier, right? So how the nuance of that actually plays out, I think, is a complicated thing that has to be sorted out.
Well, it seems like, you answer it in two ways. You partly by analogy to how do we take existing copyright law and how would you apply it, which I think is useful. But ultimately, I think, as you're saying, I think you get what is the economic goal here? And some of us in the digital economy lab are working on trying to figure out, let's just strip away whatever the current laws and whatever, and fundamentally, how do you provide incentives for people to create valuable content, for people to use it? And because if the incentives aren't there, people aren't going to create it, and then we're all worse off. So you want to have some payoff to the creators. You don't want to give everything away because then there's no incentive to use it. And allocating that is there is a little bit of an economics of IP, of optimal patents, optimal fair use. And it roughly, our current copyright and patent systems do sort of make some efforts to match up to what economists also think the economics are. Even if you go back to the Constitution, it's like the reason it's in the Constitution, patents and copyrights, in order to provide incentives. It specifically says to provide incentives to create that. So that's the goal. But it seems, as your later examples were showing, we have to rethink a lot of that. Because a lot of the costs and benefits have changed by orders of magnitude. So it would be almost a miracle if the exact same system could be used as is.
Very surprising.
Yeah, you're going to have to rethink it a fair amount. So let's go. Let's move the mic over sort of towards the middle there. How about in the orange shirt? Yeah,
behind you. Yeah.
Hi, Reid, one of the business school students. Thanks for coming. My question is about a philosophy that's seemingly more popular nowadays, that hallucinations aren't actually hallucinations. It's the output of the same stochastic probabilistic process of anything that's output. And so it's not like a human where they know they're telling the truth or they know they're telling a lie. It's just the same thing as when you get something accurate or right or truthful. So my question is really, is it possible for a model to reliably produce accurate outputs without a genuine grasp of truth in order to get us to the 5 nines SLAs that people want? And is that something that we can get with the research that we have now, either commercially or in academia, or is this just not something that is possible with the current world?
Unfortunately, I think the simple answer to your question is yes, it is.
It is possible.
It is possible. Yeah. Right?
Why is that unfortunate?
Well, it's a very simple answer to the question, to an otherwise interesting question. And it's partially because as long as you can get down to, for all things, you just say, the general oracle has no hallucinations whatsoever, I don't think you can get to 5 nines. But if you said, on radiology, yes.
Just with the existing LLM model. We don't need to RAG or all these other things.
No. What you're actually using RAG, and you're using a bunch of others. By the way, you're using multiple models. You're having a model.
Oh, okay, so it's not just turning. Okay, yes.
But to get to the 5 nines in today's technology, the answer is yes.
Today's technology broadly defined, not just transformers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Let's keep having the mic move on over. How about all the way to the end there? Same row. Yeah.
Hey, Reid, from the business school. I would love to ask about your view on AI and healthcare. So Vinod Khosla said by 2034, we're all going to have free AI doctors. Do you believe this? Do you not? Also, it just makes sense. The patient doesn't have the expertise, the doctor doesn't have the time. And if you think AI doctors will happen or whatever your view is, like who do you think is going to succeed in it? Is it going to be like the current health incumbents, the LLMs, the open AIs of the world, or like startups are going to capture this opportunity?
You know Vinod's vision on this.
Yeah. I'm not sure which of us came up with that one first. Actually.
Oh, you think you beat him to it?
I don't know.
I heard you talk about it as well. He talks about it more frequently.
Yeah, it's true. But I love the fact that he's doing that. So I think the only reason we wouldn't have a kind of doctor on a smartphone by, call it 2030, let alone 2034, is because of regulation and liability and other kinds of things. And it's one of the things that I advocate to governments to say that they should try to fix this universe, because the more that we had there was kind of provision to society is that there was a free doctor on every phone, the better off society would be. And that would actually, in fact, for example, my guess is if we provision that, it would bring down our overall medical bill a lot, right, relative to overall efficiency. And so government and our society should want that. I think that existing regulated industry is very unlikely to get there because they think entirely within the current set of regulations. And I think you need to change it to where you're allowed to have an agent that essentially has a safe harbor for giving medical advice parameterized in some ways. Now, some of the parameters might obviously be, well, do you have access to a doctor? Right? If you say yes, it's like, well, could you see a doctor in a day? It's like, okay, great. Well, here, I'm going to tell you what things to tell your doctor. Go see your doctor, right? To kind of wrap back with it. But it's like, there's lots of people who don't have access to a doctor, and certainly don't have access to a doctor other than going to an emergency room in a country where they may have access to that. And I think that what's likely is the regulatory impediment is likely to be so high there that what you're going to see is a lot of startups that can take this kind of risk, taking the shot on goal with a bunch of yelling and corpses, partially from like startup corpses from the regulatory process, until finally the system goes. But the existing large companies won't do it because of the legal regulatory structure. I think today you could start constructing, like literally, if you had the right legal structure today, you could have one of these, functioning on reasonable inference costs, within a small number of months.
Putting on your entrepreneur human who works around the system as opposed, and comes up with the creative way of beating the system. How would you get around those regulations? How would you deliver healthcare on a phone to hundreds of millions of people if the AMA, American Medical Association, got the regulators to say, no, you're not allowed to do that?
Well, the question would be is you'd have to not be able to be drowned in court, right? Because it's very easy to get drowned in court. So you either have to end, combining that with ethics would be, well, where is a country that would say, we would like you to do that here?
So you go offshore.
Yeah, right. And then you build
have the
there.
internet.
Yeah, you build there.
And you challenge them to block your IP address.
Well, if you're coming back, the question is, what do you do vis-a-vis if you're operating? Because one of the things on a phone, you have GPS location. This gets back to the GPS thing. It's like, do you say in environment, like, for example, you could say, oh, you're now in a country that doesn't allow this, click here to send a nastygram to your local congressperson.
Like Travis did with Uber. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Well, that seems like something like half the problem would be working on that, getting it to work around the regulations.
We should want it. I'd rather just get the regulatory intelligence. Like, we want this badly.
Do you think you could get Congress to? I mean, you spend a lot of time working with government.
Yeah, less with Congress, dental surgery and all that. Maybe.
Okay,
There's a decided maybe.
Let's bring the mic back over here. How about right here? In this, or no, I was thinking right here in the red shirt. Sorry. Would you say your name?
Hey, Reid, thanks for coming. I'm studying computer science and MBA here. I've been studying a bit about BCI, brain computing interface, and AI. Do you see there's a future where in the next 5 to 10 years we have hardware which links to our brain thoughts, and then AI really become our personal agent without we giving them data explicitly?
Well, I'm not. Yeah, it depends what you mean by data explicitly. I think if you have any kind of connectivity, you're also giving data. I think that we are certainly going to be investing full bore on the kind of set of devices that have computational inputs and outputs that are not just, language, fingers, audio, et cetera, and will do things that are kind of direct into your nervous system in various ways.
When you say we, you mean like society, or do you mean Greylock, or?
I mean Western technological invention.
Okay.
Right? And maybe global technological invention.
Okay.
I certainly see a bunch in the US. And there's all a bunch of needs for it. I mean, there's obviously, in people who have various health challenges, it can be very positive. So it's, there's this kind of question around, what is the future of interfaces? I do think that the ones that ultimately get to kind of a surgical kind of thing versus a non-surgical will be slower than people think, because they're just all kinds of unknown health things. And unless it was like you're solving a health thing or the benefits so much, it's like, well, why not be more cautious on the health thing? But that's part of the reason I think there's going to be a lot of things that are going to be non-surgical, that as opposed to look, we drilled through your skull and we put something in there. Like, well, okay. Right. It'll be more like, a set of, because, we have less good impedance, but we do have a bunch of ways that our whole nervous system does it. I think there will be a bunch of those that will probably come mass market first.
Yeah, Max Hodak, one of the founders of Neuralink, said that currently that when they do put those implants in, they destroy like 7, 8, 9 neurons for every one they connect to. It's not a great ratio.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. All right, who else has a question? How about all the way in the back there? Yeah.
Hi, Reid. I'm in the School of Medicine, but this is not a healthcare related question. It's more around just general personal productivity. So I know you spent a lot of time with blitz scaling companies, employees, founders, et cetera. And there's this concept around technology as part of your team and organizational behavior research. And one of the things that I find that I'm doing now is I constantly have multiple tabs open with different GPT, Gemini, et cetera. And I constantly have to adapt to the model I'm using, as well as they advance, I will have to adapt to that as well. How do you think about embracing that uncomfortable kind of change? It's like working with new coworkers every week, right? Any advice from blitzscaling concepts?
Well, blitzscaling is a little different in terms of scaling organization versus individual side, but I do think that part of the whole agentic universe is a very natural thing that will happen is, like, I already have kind of an environment on my laptop by which I can throw in a query and it will run multiple prompts on multiple agents, integrate the answers back, give me a rich formatted text, like a document that goes, the macro thing I think on this query is this, but here's how you could dig into the various different things. And that loop makes it much more powerful as a research assistant for, like, when I'm trying to derive information on certain things. And it includes going through, kind of like search APIs and other things. So it includes analysis of search results and other kinds of things. And I think part of the reason I built it is I think that we are a limited time away from where that will be an option, on every computer and phone, as an example.
So speaking of agentic AI, and Eric Schmidt, when he was here, was talking about text to action being a really important thing. And last year, Mustafa talked about artificial capable intelligence. Tell us a little bit about where you think that the world is going in terms of having LLMs that sort of give you text and give you advice, to LLMs that take actions, that make reservations, that do stuff in the world, that place orders, buy and sell things, make things.
So the thing that I think that people underthink about, which like all of these different interface points of the world, I think we are on track to happening and so forth, and figuring out what the safety and alignment principles are and what kinds of things to do, is that to some degree what makes the AI revolution so interesting is it's not just a tool, it is the meta tool. So it's the meta tool that goes on top of, helping me when I'm triaging my email box, helping me when I'm doing searching, helping me when I'm setting up a restaurant reservation, helping me when I'm doing, research, helping me when I'm working on, my Excel spreadsheet on finances. And part of that is like even the LLMs today, if, for example, you had a hankering to create some jazz music, there are computer software tools that can help you do that. They are enormously complicated to use. For you to learn to do that is like hundreds of hours. You can actually go to an LLM and say, I want to use this music tool. What are the outputs? This is a little bit of the text action stuff, like script. And then iterate through that, and it's the meta tool on top of that tool. So every single tool that we use can, for our cognitive area.
We have a whole bunch of tools, some of which, like you're right, take hundreds of hours to learn.
This is going to be a meta tool for all of those. That's essentially what's going on. Yes.
Well, on that, we're basically out of time here. So you've been through a bunch of AI, a bunch of tech revolutions going back, and you possibly the most connected person in Silicon Valley in terms of anything. Any closing advice for folks as how they should think about this time in history, and how much of it is hype, how much is real, what they should be doing? More than half the students are doing business plans for their projects. A bunch are doing policy proposals, others are doing research proposals. Any closing advice or comments?
I guess the primary thing would be I don't think, as much as the hype is, people frequently think that there's going to be something that's going to be so different 1 year from now. It's like if you could lens into the future a year from now, it's not going to look that different than from now. But what happens is it compounds quickly, and suddenly 10 years from now, it looks really different, or 5 years from now, it looks really different, even though each year time slice. And that dynamism is extremely important. So whatever you're kind of thinking about is to think about okay, given how dynamic this technological environment is going, and it's kind of like you say as a platform, it's more than the mobile phone, it's more than the internet, it's more than cloud computing, because it amplifies all of them, right? Because it builds upon them and brings them to a new amplification layer. To be thinking about that and kind of what does that mean? And it's one of the reasons why the first chapter in Impromptu was on education, because the various education institutions are going, this is bad, we're going to ban it. You're like, well, that's a terrible idea, right? Yep. And just because we happen to have fixed on a model of how we do education and training and assessment that's decades old doesn't mean we should necessarily keep that, and we should
definitely not
fix it. So on the improvement. So that's broadly it. But I think that it's a cognitive industrial revolution. You do have time to kind of sort out and figure this stuff out, but expect dynamic change.
All right. Well, thank you, Reid. It's amazing what you shared with us. Thank you so much for taking your time and